Hi everyone, it's Miss Costa here, and in this video we're going to look at how to solve two-step equations. So make sure you're familiar with the laws of algebra, with the laws of the operations, BIDMAS, and that you feel confident solving one-step equations before you watch this. Okay, so here we've got some examples of two-step equations, which means we're going to need to take 2 steps in order to get x isolated and figure out its value. So once again, we can think about it as a balanced scale. Remember, equations are just like balanced scales. Whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. Otherwise, they'll tip over and they won't weigh the same, or they won't be the same equation. So over here, I've got 3x, I don't know what x is, plus 8 equals 17. Now, if that was on a scale, I know that the scales are balanced. And if I took something off from one side, so long as I took the same amount off from the other, the scales would still stay the same, and I can use this to figure out my missing value. So the first thing I might want to do is get rid of the 8. So let's represent it here as subtracting 8 and here as subtracting 8. I just literally get rid of them, but because I've got rid of 8 on this side of the equation, I need to do the same to the other side, otherwise the scales will tip. So I've got rid of 8 here and I've got rid of 8 on there. And now I'm just left with 3x equals 9. So because, what have I done? 8 take 8 cancels. And you're left with 17 take 8 is 9. So you know that 3x equals 9. And if you've done the one-step equation video, hopefully you know what to do now. So 3 lots of x, 3 times by x gives me 9. To move anything from one side to the other, I do the inverse. So I divide both sides by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. It cancels itself out. That's where I do it. So x would be 3. And if I did it here, so divide by 3, so chop off 2 of them and chop off 2 over here, you're left with x equals 3. Whatever x is, a nice big present, weighs 3 kilograms. Okay, so now let's apply the same logic here. Obviously, it's a little bit more difficult to represent it visually with negatives. So we just have to follow the rules. So people sometimes get confused because they know that this means 4 times x, and they might say, oh, I'm going to divide by 4. That is fine, but it'll make your life a little bit trickier than it needs to be, because whatever you do to one side, you need to do to the other. But also, x is being multiplied by 4. So if I divide this by 4, I'm also going to have to divide this by 4. Okay, so that would make your life a lot trickier than it needs to be. So instead, we always follow the reverse of BIDMAS or BODMAS, whatever it is, the order of operations. Okay, now just a quick recap, the order of operations, the first thing you do is anything that's in brackets. The second is anything that's in indices. The third is multiplication or division, and the last is addition or subtraction. Now what we do when we're solving equations, we do the reverse order. So using BIDMAS, what would be happening here? X would be being multiplied by 4, and then 7 is being subtracted from it. And what comes out is 33. So I have to do the reverse of what I'd do using BIDMAS. I would add 7 first. So I'd add 7 to both sides. I'd be left with 4x equals 40. And then what would I do? I would divide by 4, still doing the inverse. So divide both sides by 4, and I'm left with x equals 10. Okay, you can also use a flow diagram if you like, if that helps you, as long as you know that you are doing, when you're solving equations, you're doing the reverse order of BIDMAS. So you can use a flow chart to say, what does BIDMAS tell me I have to do first, and then do the reverse. And now we get to a tricky one. So if you're not 100% confident with negatives, don't worry about this one just yet. But I'm going to show it to you just so that you know if you are feeling confident. So I always do the reverse. So I've got a negative 2x, because remember the sign always belongs to the term after it. I've got 30 over here. So I'm going to subtract 30 from both sides. And the reason is, if you were doing your flow chart, so what would be happening, this is a tricky one, x would be being multiplied by negative 2, and then it's got 30 being added to it. and 18 comes out. So I subtract 30, that's the first thing I do. So I'm left with minus 2x equals 18 take away 30, leaves me with 22. And now what can I do? Well, if I use the reverse of BIDMAS, I've subtracted my 30, and now I'm going to have to do the inverse, which is, sorry, let's just say timesing by minus 2, dividing by negative 2. Okay, so x is being multiplied by negative 2, and so I want to divide both sides by negative 2 in order to get x on its own. So 22 divided by negative 2 would give me negative 11. Okay, so that's how we do that one. But don't worry if you haven't covered negatives yet in school, or if you're not 100% confident with them, because the point of this is that you understand how to solve equations. If you can do these first two, then you're doing great. So let's have a go at practicing these in the questions just now. So here are the practice questions for you. And remember, whenever we solve equations, we need to do the reverse of what BIDMAS would tell us to do. So BIDMAS tells us we to do multiplication first and then the addition. So we do things in the reverse to move them. So we do subtraction and addition first and then multiplication or division. And here are your answers. The working out is in green and then the final answer is in pink. Okay, so here we've got some examples of two-step equations involving fractions, and let's see how we can solve them. So remember, whenever I'm trying to solve an equation, I want to isolate my x value. I want that to be on its own on one side of the equation. I always need to think about what the order of operations are. So if I think about this, I've got x. What's happening to it? It's being divided by 2. Remember, division always comes before addition or subtraction. And then 7 is being added to it. What comes out is 12. So using BIDMAS, whenever I'm solving equations, I always do the reverse in order to move things from one side to the other. So I'm going to have to, first step is, I'm going to have to subtract 7 because I'm doing the inverse. And why do I do the inverse? Because it cancels out. 7 takes 7, leaves me with nothing. And that's why I'm just left with x over 2 on this side. Okay, so x over 2 equals 12 take 7, leaves me with 5. So x over 2 equals 5. Something divided by 2 leaves me with 5. What do I have to do? The inverse. Remember, this means divide. So I times both sides by 2, and I'm left with x equals 10. And I've solved it. Whenever you've got x on its own, you have finished. You have solved the equation. Okay, so if you prefer the flow diagram, that's fine, as long as you are really clear on which order the operations are going in. Same thing over here. So what's happening to my x? Think about the order of operations. It's being divided by 3, and then 4 is being subtracted from it, and 17 is the result. So in order to get x on its own, I'm going to have to, first of all, add 4 to both sides. I always do the inverse of BODMAS. So x over 3 leaves me with 17 plus 4, which is 21. Then what do? I multiply both sides by 3. So x is 21 times by 3, which is 63. Okay, so for the second one, I'm going to show you a little trick that you can do. Now, in the first set of equations, I told you that if you've got a negative x, you can multiply both sides of the equation by -1 in order to turn it into a positive. And you can do that. So if you solve this and when you get to the end, you've got a negative x, that's absolutely fine. But if you don't like working with negative numbers, what you want to do when you've got a negative x or negative x over something is just move it to the other side. So we can move things from one side to the other as many times as we like, because we're still keeping the equations balanced. So if I add x over 2 to both sides, then it becomes a positive. So I'd be left with 15 equals 30 plus x over 2. And it doesn't matter that x is on this side. It doesn't matter at all, because if you said x equals 4, that is exactly the same as 4 equals x. It doesn't matter what side it's on, it's the same. So what would I do? Well, there's a positive 30 over here. So I'm going to subtract 30 from both sides. And I'm left with 15 take 30 is negative 15 equals x over 2. And what would I do next? X is being divided by 2. So I multiply both sides by 2. So I'd be left with negative 30 equals x. And that is exactly the same. So if you said negative 30 equals x, it's exactly the same as saying x is negative 30, okay? Don't be worried that your x has been moved onto this side. Just switch it back at the very end. And that's a different way of dealing with negative x's, okay? I personally say that's the easiest way. Just move it to the other side and then it becomes positive. Okay, it cancels out on here and you're left with a positive. So let's see if we can apply this to the questions right now. So here are the practice questions. Press pause so that you can have a go at working these out for yourself. And remember, with the starred questions, the key thing is just move the x fraction onto the other side. You can do whatever you like to both sides of the equation, as long as whatever you do to one, you do to the other. And anything that you move it by doing the inverse so that it cancels itself out. And here are your answers. So hopefully you got on pretty well. Let me know how you get on by dropping a comment and let me know if I need to explain anything in a different way. Thanks for watching.